You're 35,000 feet above the ocean. The cabin is pressurized, the engines hum, and somewhere beneath the floor of the aircraft, bolted to the airframe, there's a small orange box that can survive anything. Fire, water, impact forces that would turn steel into confetti. It records every word spoken in the cockpit, every altitude change, every engine reading, every movement of the controls, and if the plane goes down, that box is the one thing investigators will search for first. Before the wreckage, before the bodies, before anything else. But here's what you don't know. The man who invented that box was told it would never work. He was told nobody wanted it. He was told to stop. And when he finally proved everyone wrong, the world forgot his name. His name was David Warren. And his story begins with a death. It's 1934. David is 8 years old, living in rural Australia. His father is a minister, a pilot, and a man who flies himself to remote towns for Sunday services. One morning, his father boards a de Havilland DH-86 Express in Queensland. The plane takes off over the sea. It never arrives. The wreckage is found floating in the water. Everyone on board is dead. No one knows why. There's no explanation. There's no recording. There's no black box. There's nothing but ocean and silence. That silence followed David Warren for the rest of his childhood. His father's plane crashed and the world simply moved on. No investigation that meant anything. No data. No answers. Just a boy growing up without a father, and a question that would take 20 years to even begin answering. Fast forward to the 1950s. David Warren is now a research scientist at the Aeronautical Research Laboratories in Melbourne. He's smart. He's curious. He works on aircraft fuel chemistry. And then in 1953, something happens that changes everything. The de Havilland Comet. The world's first commercial jet airliner. It's beautiful. It's fast. Airlines are ordering them by the dozen, and then without warning they start falling out of the sky. One comet disintegrates over the Mediterranean near Elba. Another crashes near Naples. The entire fleet is grounded. Britain is desperate to understand why. David Warren is brought onto the investigation team. He's not an accident investigator. He's a fuel chemist. But he starts thinking about something no one else is thinking about. If only there had been a recording. If only the crew's last conversations were captured. If only the instrument readings were preserved. If only investigators could replay the final minutes the way you'd replay a piece of music. And then it hits him, a flight memory unit, a device that continuously records cockpit conversations and instrument data, small enough to survive a crash, tough enough to survive fire, loud enough to be found in wreckage. He builds a prototype in 1958. It's crude. It uses steel wire instead of magnetic tape. It records 4 hours of cockpit voice and instrument data. He calls it the Aeronautical Research Laboratory Flight Memory Unit. He's proud of it. He's excited. He brings it to the Australian aviation authorities and presents it with confidence. They reject it. Not quietly, not gently. They tell him flatly that no one would ever use such a device. They tell him that pilots would never accept being recorded. They tell him the idea is impractical. They tell him to stop working on it. One official reportedly says, "Don't waste our time." David Warren doesn't stop, but the rejection stings. His prototype sits on a shelf. The Australian aviation industry moves on without it. Then, in 1958, something unexpected happens. A British technical mission visits the Aeronautical Research Laboratories in Melbourne. They're touring Australian aviation facilities as part of a broader technical exchange. One of the British engineers sees Warren's prototype on a shelf. He picks it up. He asks questions. He takes detailed notes. When that engineer returns to Britain, the idea of a flight recorder travels with him. British companies begin developing their own versions. The concept spreads through European aviation circles. Within a few years, flight recorders are being manufactured and installed in aircraft across the world. But David Warren's name isn't on any of them. For decades, the flight recorder, now called the black box even though it's painted bright orange, becomes a standard piece of aviation equipment. By the 1960s, countries begin mandating them. Australia, ironically, becomes one of the first nations to require flight recorders in commercial aircraft. The very country that told David Warren his idea was useless now forces every airline to use it. The modern black box is a marvel of engineering. It can withstand temperatures of 1100 degrees Celsius. It can survive being submerged in salt water for 30 days. It can endure impact forces of 3,400 times the force of gravity. Inside, it stores up to 25 hours of flight data and 2 hours of cockpit voice recordings. It has a sonar beacon that activates on contact with water, sending out a ping every second for 30 days, so search teams can locate it even under thousands of feet of ocean. Since mandatory recording became standard, flight investigators have used black box data to solve crash after crash after crash. The Tenerife disaster in 1977, the Air France Flight 447 crash in 2009, the Germanwings tragedy in 2015. In every case, the black box told the story that the dead could not. But David Warren, he was invisible. For over 40 years, the man who invented the flight recorder received almost no credit. The aviation industry grew into a trillion-dollar global enterprise, and the device at its center had no credited inventor in the public mind. Engineers in Britain, France, and the United States refined and marketed flight recorders. Patents were filed. Companies made fortunes. And the Australian fuel chemist who built the first working prototype in a Melbourne lab was a footnote, if he was mentioned at all. It wasn't until the early 2000s that David Warren finally received recognition. In 2002, he was awarded the Order of Australia, one of the country's highest honors. Journalists began writing about him. Documentaries were produced. The story of the rejected inventor, the man who was told to stop, the man who was right all along, resonated with people everywhere. David Warren died on July 19, 2010. He was 85 years old. By then, his invention had been installed in every commercial aircraft on Earth. Every single flight you've ever taken had his creation on board. Every crash investigation you've ever read about depended on his idea. And here's the part that should bother you. The people who rejected David Warren weren't stupid. They weren't evil. They were simply unable to see what he could see. They looked at a world where plane crashes were mysterious, inevitable, and unsolvable, and they accepted that reality. David Warren looked at the same world and refused to accept it. He imagined a device that could speak for the dead. That could turn silence into data. That could turn mystery into answers. The next time you board a plane and hear the flight attendant announce your cruising altitude, think about that small orange box bolted somewhere in the fuselage behind you. Think about a boy in 1934 who lost his father to silence. Think about a scientist who was told his idea was worthless. And think about how the most important inventions often come from the people who are told, again and again, that nobody wants what they're building. David Warren asked a question the aviation world didn't want to answer. What actually happened? And because he wouldn't stop asking, every flight you take is safer than it would have been without him.